just being a Black woman in America, you have to learn to live at intersections.
This is Sha'Condria iCon Sibley, New Orleans-based poet and multidisciplinary artist, and you are listening to The Next World, a podcast about building movements. This is a show that explores and celebrates the work of poor people's movements, particularly in the U.S., that are pushing the boundaries and have the potential to transform this society. Today on the show, we are excited to present a conversation between show host Max Rameau and members of the organization Moms4Housing. You may have heard of Moms4Housing from their action last year when they seized control of a house in Oakland that a real estate speculator was keeping vacant and used it to provide housing for several mothers and their children. Our guests are two members of the organization, Carroll Fife, director of the Oakland chapter of Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment, and housing activist Dominique Walker, who participated in the first Moms4Housing housing takeover. Together, we will explore what brought them to the act of civil disobedience of moving families into empty housing in Oakland, how they are handling the current pandemic, and what is next in the movement for housing.
Okay, great. First of all, many of us have been following this story with Moms4Housing and your work in this area. So, Carol and Dominique, I really appreciate your joining us and chatting with us. And I just want to get a sense of how you are dealing with this pandemic situation, with all of this quarantine and physical isolation. How are you doing? How are you managing with that?
Well, hi, my name is Dominique Walker. I'm a member of Moms4Housing and ACE. And how I'm handling the pandemic, I think that now more than ever, there's a need for housing. Like it's always been a need for housing, and now we're seeing the racism and COVID and the disparities of folks, especially living out on the street. And in Oakland, we're trying to get folks off the streets and into the hotels. And right now, I think it's more important than ever to organize, because after all of this is over, it's going to be a lot of folks potentially homeless if there's not total rent forgiveness and debt forgiveness during this pandemic. But I've been sheltering in place. It seems like there's a lot more work to be done. So we're getting creative in how we organize, Zoom and other ways that we organize and reach out to folks.
Carol?
How I'm handling it is being more available of service to populations of folks that I work with personally, organizationally, also trying to respond to the immediate needs of individuals who've been disappeared and marginalized. So that comes in the form of a type of universal basic income support. It also comes in the form of getting masks and supplies to people through the use of another organization called Community Ready Corps that's been giving out, grocery gift cards and COVID kits to Black and brown folks throughout the East Bay, and just trying to ensure that people, if they don't have a place to stay, that they can get one. We're currently housing a couple of homeless moms, and if they are sheltered, that they remain sheltered. We're seeing a lot of harassment of folks that are on rent strike, and landlords are trying to pressure people to continue paying rent, even though everyone is aware that a third of Americans didn't pay rent on April 1st, and in Oakland that number doubled for the people that we are working with on rent strike. So it's a very busy time, very busy.
So let me turn to Dominique here. Dominique, we've seen you and the other moms in this situation in the Bay Area, which has captured many in the social justice movement's attention. But give us a little background about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your childhood. Where did you grow up? What was your community like? What was your family life like when you were growing up?
I grew up in East Oakland on Oral Street in Reddsdale. And my childhood was interesting. I was born in 85, and that was during the crack epidemic. So both of my parents were victims of that. So I was raised by my great-grandparents. So there was like a, generation gap. But my neighborhood in Oakland on Oral Street, it was like a family. Like everyone knew each other. Folks had been there from like the 50s, like from migrating from the South. And it's a community, like everyone knew each other. And I went to Calsamont High School where I started organizing there. And our organization co-founded our high school. And after I graduated high school, I went to college in Mississippi. After I graduated, I stayed for some time. I came back home. I visited a lot and I saw the changes. It was like gradual, like every time I would visit, there would be less and less of my community in their houses. Eventually, when I moved back with my 2 small children last year, it was April 2019. And it was completely different. Like you think about going home, you think about coming home and seeing folks like get older and seeing if your friends and neighbors have children, and there was no sense of community. Nobody except for my great grandmother and like one other person were the original families on the block who owned their homes. The foreclosure crisis hit, and it just seemed like systematic. And then now there's 4,000 to 6,000 folks, or probably more now, sleeping on the streets, and 7 out of 10 of them are African American. So it was by design. And when I came home and saw that, it was like my immediate concern. And I also was homeless with 2 small children. And I think that this really resonated with folks because rent is high everywhere, and housing is a basic human need. It shelters you from the elements. It supports brain development in your children and everything. So it's really, really important to have shelter. And the new face of homelessness, like most people at first wouldn't think about mothers and babies homeless, and we are. So I think that it was the new face of homelessness. It doesn't matter if you went to college or you cannot afford the rents here. You have to make $40, again, 88 cents an hour to afford a 1-bedroom apartment here.
Carroll, you have been a longtime organizer. How did you come to be an organizer? What was your path to get there? And what are some of the campaigns that you participated in?
Oh, my goodness. I don't even know where to start.
All pre-mom stuff now. We're getting to the mom stuff, but all pre-moms. How did you get there? And then what did you participate in?
Been doing this for a couple decades, and I guess I just came to it because I just have a really strong sense of what's right and wrong. And I grew up in the Midwest. I have parents that migrated to the Midwest in Illinois and Michigan during the Great Migration, and watching my parents sacrifice and give to our local community, not just my parents, but my grandparents, watching just their levels of sacrifice for the people around them, I guess was just something that was always a part of my life. And then just having this strong sense of justice of like, people should have food, people should have a place to stay. My mom would take us to the local rescue missions and make sure that people had food and clothing when we were really, really little. And, I think it transferred. So as an adult, I moved to California in the 90s. I had actually just turned 21 when I moved to California. Now I've lived here over half my life. I'd never seen homelessness in the way that I'd seen it on LA Skid Row. And it hurts. It hurts to see it when the people who are living there predominantly are a reflection of who you are. And to see that this is just an extension of a period of American history that's never really ended for Black folks really drives home that this is systemic, and it's something that needs to be addressed aggressively by any means necessary to make sure that there's justice for Black folks, because this country has never done right by us. And so I've been an organizer my entire adult life, from LA to Oakland, creating systems of independent education outside of the public education system through health care clinics that were created by community members. We had a Black study group, and out of that study group emanated our school and our health clinic and our workout team and all the different things that we felt needed to create like a self-determined network inside of Oakland. And that's been my entire that was my organizing beginning. We had some death and some folks leave, but the core of the individuals that created those systems and schools and all of those things have stayed together. And that is the same group of individuals that is giving out the COVID kits right now.
And is that happening through the Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment, or is that another?
No, that is a
entity?
strictly separate entity. The Community Ready Corps. It is intentionally created for the self-determination of Black people, and that is the structure. That's where that came from. It's the same organization and the same individuals that worked with folks like Kalia Kuno back in the 80s and 90s, and the Association of Classical African Civilizations, and a lot of different groups back in the day. There's not a lot of us left here.
Right. But just to be clear, though, you're a member of at least two different organizations, and you feel like each one serves a unique purpose. In other words, you don't see a conflict with being part of more than one organization. Is that right? I think a lot of folks these days think about what is my organization or my one organization, but you seem to have at least two that you're working with, and maybe they do distinct things in your vision or in your life.
Correct. And they have to. I mean, there's limits to every different organization. And I think just being a Black woman in America, you have to learn to live at intersections and survive and thrive at intersections. And it's the same thing organizationally. I couldn't accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish as my personal life goal, just being a director at a nonprofit organization. Nonprofit organizations were created by robber barons to hide the abuses that they levy on the planet, on people's bodies, on the economy, and all of those different things. And so understanding the limitations of those different spaces, those different organizations, allows me to be in multiple places to achieve a much broader objective.
Yeah, and I think the limitations of the 501c3 industrial complex, as some of us like to call it, of course, you can do some great work inside of 501c3s, but certainly not the liberation type work, the self-determination type work that you're talking about. Doesn't seem like it can be done inside the context of a 501c3.
The operational objective of the Community Ready Corps is extraction. What value can we extract from all of these different spaces? It's the same thing for electoral spaces, one of the places I also engage. There's limitations to all of them. And then even with CRC, I wouldn't be able to move in certain rooms saying I'm a part of a Black self-determined organization.
Right.
People would look at me like I'm crazy. So we have to adapt, and we have to be able to code switch.
And that's part of a holistic movement. So Dominique, how did you meet and start working with Carroll?
When I moved back home, and one of my friends who actually I organized with as a youth was working with Carroll at ACE, and I was home and I was looking for work. I was doing like delivery services and things like that. I wanted to do some tenant work. I saw what was going on, and I'm like, I need to be active in my community. So that's how it started.
And so you were over at ACE doing some work, engaged in ACE in some way, because you were already doing community organizing, I guess, from your college days, or even when you were back in the Bay Area before college?
Yes.
From the college days?
From high school. So I was organizing in high school, and then I was in Jackson, Mississippi. I was working with Cooperation Jackson and with the previous mayor, Chokwe Lumumba, doing some organizing work. And got back home and I saw my neighborhood. I'm like, I have to do something. This is a health crisis, because I was in nursing school. I wanted to study medicine. I wanted to be a nurse practitioner. I still want to. But I was coming back to go to the University of San Francisco, but this is immediate health crisis. Like, this is number one for my people. Like, they're out here dying, and there's pregnant women who don't want to let folks know that they're pregnant because they're taking their children because they don't have shelter. So it was an immediate health crisis, and I felt like I had to get involved.
You know, it's very interesting hearing you frame the problem or situations of Black people in this society as a health problem, because that's really was the perspective that Frantz Fanon took when he wrote his book, particularly Wretched of the Earth. And he, of course, was a psychiatrist, so he came at it as what is the psychological impact of colonialism on colonized people. So I think it's fascinating that you're talking about it in that particular way. Okay, so you've already described how you come back from college. You were at Wade College in Mississippi. You come back, and your town has changed completely, and then you find yourself in a situation where you're struggling for work, and then ultimately you're housing insecure. You become homeless yourself. How did you meet up with other people who were in your same situation, and what kind of conversations did you engage in? And did that happen through ACE, or did that happen somewhere else, or how did that happen?
Yes, I was doing work with ACE. I was the community outreach coordinator. So I would offer our services. We were looking for folks who got like 3-day notices or are at risk for being evicted, if they need free legal services, back mortgage, back rent payment assistance, offering these services and talking to folks. And it just seemed like we were a little bit too late. Like, I had a form where I fill out like their name, their address, and the address part on like 5 pages in a row, like blank, like nobody has a place to live.
Yeah.
So it was alarming. It was very alarming. Like, I saw it, but to actually talk and hear the stories, like it made it more personal, more human to me to engage with folks and actually hear their stories. Like, I met a man, an elder, and he had a master's degree. He'd worked, and he just could not afford the rent, and he was sleeping in a tent. So I started to hear everybody's different stories, but it all led back to one thing, one common issue.
But you're saying that it made it human for you when you started talking to people about this, but you were in the same situation. So how is it that you were in the situation yourself and it didn't become human to you at that point? What was the disconnect that was happening?
That it was uncommon. Like, the reason I left Mississippi, I was having a domestic dispute with my partner. We broke up after like 10 years. So it was an emergency that I came home. So I didn't have time to plan and save. It was an emergency. So I thought my situation was unique. Like, I'm coming home, I'm couch surfing, I'm in Antioch, Stockton, because all my family is gone, displaced. So I thought it was unique. But as I engaged with my community, I'm like, this is all of our fight. Like, it's not unique to me. It's not unique to him. It's all of our fight.
And then at some point, Carroll gets involved and you all talk about creating what ends up becoming Moms4Housing. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you have this group and then Carroll, what's the organizing process look like where you have a group of people who are in a similar situation and they're trying to solve the problem, and at some point you have to come to the realization that this little nonprofit that you have, I don't mean little in a insulting way at all, but given the scale of the problem, this nonprofit that you have, one of the entities that you're working with, there's no way that you can solve this problem because it is a structural problem. So then how are you thinking through, or how are you talking to people about what this problem is, and how do you reach the conclusion of we have to start Moms4Housing?
Conclusion was easy because as each individual reached out to me separately and asked, Carroll, do you know of anybody that has the space available? I knew that it just doesn't exist. And so, you know, it was heartbreaking. I'm like, yeah, no, there's nothing out there. There's nothing out there that's affordable. There's nothing out there that's accessible. And it's even harder for women with children. Mm-hmm. There's just kind of this unspoken discrimination that happens when people find out that you're Black and that you have kids. So it really was clear to me that there was only one course of action, and we just needed to decide like how we were going to do it. And I think we all knew that it had to be really public. to make a statement about the current state of affairs, and that, you know, these systems are relegating people to a life of homelessness, which leads to all these other issues that become generational. So I think we just knew what had to happen.
And how long was the planning process, and how many people were involved in the planning process who were not one of the moms? In other words, did you keep this close to the vest? Did you keep this secret, or were you getting more and more people engaged? What was the process like, and how long did it take?
It took a few weeks, and we kept it really close to the vest. I didn't actually tell my organization because, once again, it's a legal activity, and I didn't want them to know. I didn't want to jeopardize the C3. So we had to rely on a lot of support from those networks of folks that I talked about earlier. Mm-hmm.
And is that ultimately why, given the type of work that it was, that you started a new organization, Moms4Housing, as opposed to doing this kind of work through an existing one?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's recap what happens here. There's millions of people across the country, and tens of thousands at least, if not a little bit more than that, across the Bay Area, who are housing insecure, if not outright living in the street. And a group of you get together and you start to discuss options. You realize there's not many left. And finally, at some point, someone says, you know what, there's really not any options. We have to break into a house and move into there. Were you all aware at this time when you were discussing this type of action was, you know, frowned upon by the legal community?
By the legal community?
By the legal community, yeah. Was it? Were you fully aware, and were you openly discussing the fact that this was against the law?
Oh, totally. And it was, I just want to make a distinction between what you said. None of the moms broke into the house. The house was open. And it needs to
Yes, thank you. I was just about to say that. The house was open when we moved in.
It's an important distintion to make.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you think that there's any significance to engaging in the action that was? So let me just back up. I did some work with a group called Take Back the Land a decade ago or more, and we felt that a critical part of our work was doing something that was against the law. And it was, we made it, we created analogies to civil disobedience, but civil disobedience is when you break an immoral law. And that's civil disobedience. But we thought we were going one step further than that, and we were implementing a moral law, not just breaking an immoral one, but by housing people, we were actually putting into place our own public policy and implementing a moral law. We call that moral obedience or positive action as opposed to civil disobedience. Did you feel like there was a particularly important point in doing something that, as you said, was illegal? Or wasn't recognized by the state?
Absolutely. There were several laws that were broken. Just occupying the space that we held for 2 months was illegal, technically, according to the law.
Right.
But, you know, in this country, there's so many laws that are intended to police Black bodies. Mm-hmm. So we were definitely calling attention to the fact that the housing policies and practices and the structures are racist, with the outcomes that they create for Black folks, was to draw attention to the lack of morality of what a system that allows women and children to be on the streets. I make a distinction because we also know that Black folks are targeted by law enforcement in a certain kind of way. And what my desire to do was to ensure that the mothers, if it ever came up, that they would not be indicted for the breaking and entry, mm-hmm. but they had full awareness and decision-making over occupying the space and remaining in the space and being arrested for that occupation in order to protest and to create a new system of housing policies that we're still working on through the universal right to housing.
Yeah, that is an incredibly fine line to walk, where you want to empower people to make those decisions, but you don't want the full brunt of the responsibilities to fall on them. So I appreciate that line that you're trying to walk, but it is a real one. Dominique, how in your mind were you able to make the distinction between what is legal or illegal and moral and immoral?
I mean, I've always thought about land, like in the United States, when they try to say that land doesn't belong to this person. I mean, we're on stolen land. Like, this is all stolen land. This is indigenous land. So I don't even recognize that. I know that, there is law here, but what's right is right. Like Carroll said, I've always stood up for, what was right. And to see mothers and children and myself, it was very important. And what's law is not always right. And sometimes you have to break the law to change it. That's how things happen in the civil rights movement. So this is our movement now. Housing is a human right.
And is that ultimately where you're going with this, to get housing recognized as a human right, legal right, constitutional right?
Absolutely.
And what do you think it'll take to do that? Like, are there any particular things that you think would indicate to you that this is working, that you've won?
Just the fact that folks are on rent strike all over. The moms were organizing with moms from all over the world because we want some kind of, universal right to housing. And that would end homelessness. Everyone deserves a right to shelter. And we're going to keep it uplifting that in every space and pushing for policy that supports that.
I also think it's interesting, the emphasis here on moms. Again, I did work with the group, We'll Take Back the Land, and when we did that, we thought of ourselves as fighting against gentrification, which of course is an issue that is dear to the hearts of Black communities. But then when we did an assessment and look back, we found that of all the families that we housed, not all of them were Black, and that was fine with us. But all of them were headed by women heads of households. So it turns out what we thought was a Black campaign was actually a women's campaign. And I think in some ways you all are capturing that perfectly by talking about the Black community and talking about moms in this situation. Do you think are you being deliberate about the way you're thinking and addressing this as a women's issue and the intersectionality between class, race, and sex and gender?
It allows people to really put themselves in this position. And I feel like that's part of the reason this has such universal appeal that made international news, in addition to the over-policing of Black bodies and the militarized response to the eviction. But it's very intentional, and it's not exclusionary. We are intending to house everyone, and housing as a human right through the constitutional amendment would be an example of shifting the dynamics that currently exist, but we also don't see the legislative process as the end-all be-all. They give crumbs and concessions to quiet movements, and we are going to continue the movement whether we get it recognized as a constitutional amendment or not. So I think that's important to note. Like, we see benchmarks to our movement impacting electeds and policy, and we also know that it's a chess game. And they're going to keep moving against us because this is about class warfare. And they are intending to stifle working class people and poor people. So it's just, they make a move, we make a move, and vice versa. And we're going to keep on organizing to build power for people.
So back on some of the pragmatic points, what was the process for identifying the house that you ultimately took over? How many houses did you look at? How long did it take for you to find one? Did you have a scientific process of going about finding them?
Well, the community, through doing canvassing work, the community pointed out the empty homes. We did some surveying in the community, and folks were like, they wish that homes were filled with the homeless. They agreed with what we agreed with. So that's how we found out about the houses.
Well, so you were actually directed there by members of the people who lived in the neighborhood?
Yes.
Yeah.
And our neighborhood was our biggest supporters. They came out instantly, in defense for the eviction.
So on that point, so there's a house there that's really being, in my mind, is being held hostage by a speculator who's keeping it empty just to see the prices go up at other houses nearby and to that house. And then at some point, Moms4Housing goes and liberates the house from this hostage situation and actually allows it to live up to its potential and create a home for people who don't have them. And then the police come. This makes national news, local news, national news, international news. The police come and they're threatening an eviction, and you wage an incredible eviction blockade. How did you organize the supporters to come out and support the idea of an eviction blockade and really put their own safety and freedom at risk in order to defend this place for the moms?
Well, first of all, this is Oakland. so folks is always ready for that business. So that's not like a problem at all. But honestly, it's also the deep organizing that was done to create these systems and networks. From one of our primary organizers, that's a part of CRC and CRCA. And a lot of these folks have been trained politically and around what defense looks like and what defense is. And folks were just ready. I mean, this is like the biggest housing action that's taken place in Oakland for a minute. It's probably the biggest movement since, I don't know, probably Occupy. Mm-hmm. So folks want something to do. And to defend mothers and children, people are just ready and willing.
I want to come back to the movement question in 1 second, but how does Moms categorize those who are associated with it? Do you have members, and are those members the moms who need housing? And do you have, and then how do you categorize them supporters? Are supporters in the same bucket as members, or just how are you organizing people who either participate because they need to, or participate because they're allies and they want to support?
Dom, you can talk a little bit about our chapter organizing.
Yes, so we have like the founding members, so we have the steering committee, and we have supporters. We have a text blast system that gets messages out to our supporters, and we have a Facebook page and our website, but we are working on building out our chapter. We're working with Focus E15 in London and doing some international mom work, and also working with policy as well, TOPA, Tenants Opportunity to Purchase Act. Carroll can talk about TOPA.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we basically, the people who are most impacted, the founding moms or the moms who occupied the space, our steering committee is an extended group of moms who are housing insecure. And our supporters are people who understand the plight, that Black folks are the canary in the coal mine, that are an indicator for what is to come for everybody, and are willing to stand in solidarity and put their bodies on the line. Because in Oakland, we have a tenet that white allies, Latino allies, Asian allies, that we organize with follow Black leadership. And the folks who showed up are willing to do that. And they understand that the consequences for political activity is harsher for Black folks, and they're willing to stand up and put their bodies on the line so we don't experience what has been a historic persecution of Black bodies in the legal justice system. So they are willing and able to do that.
So the membership structure then really has three kind of levels: the core group of the moms, the steering committee, which has also impacted people, but maybe not the original founders, and then supporters would be then the third layer. Is that right?
That's right.
Good. I think certainly it's a much better model, I think, than lumping everyone into the category of members and then having wealthier white supporters who we want the support of in the exact same membership pool as directly impacted low-income Black women.
Right.
So the last place most of us who've been following this story have left this was there was a successful eviction defense, and then news around the eviction defense. And then as we watched you on Democracy Now!, we learned that there was a second eviction attempt taking place. And then the SWAT team really came and executed the eviction. And then shortly after that, we hear that the bank wanted to, or the speculator then wanted to negotiate a deal where they could sell the house to you. So 2 questions here. First is just, what was the experience like of the eviction itself, and particularly the aftermath of eviction? How were you all doing emotionally? And then second, what is the status of the transfer over to the Community Land Trust, which we understood was the Oakland Community Land Trust?
Yeah, so the eviction night, before we had the fence, and our neighbors came out like over 300 folks in like 15 to 20 minutes came in defense of the house. It was pretty powerful, and it showed the power of the people. It showed the power of the people, and it showed that this is Oakland. Like, Oakland has that history of resistance.
So it did, Dominique, let me know for 1 second. It did do that. We all saw that. I think what I'm asking is, how were you feeling when you were suddenly dispossessed of the place that you fought for and became identified with, and even if for a short time, called home? What was your emotional state when you were forced by a SWAT team from your home?
It made me want to fight more. It made me want to organize more. I think it fueled me to see how they come for Black women and children. I was ready to go. I was ready to keep going. And I think the other moms had that same sentiment. They were taken to jail, and I was really upset that they were taken to jail that way with the robots and the AR-15s for mothers and babies. But it lets us know how we're treated in this country, and it makes me want to organize.
Yeah, they probably would have been treated better if they would have went with rifles down to the State House and protested social distancing, huh?
Come on, right. Listen.
How were you feeling about it after it happened?
I was a mix of emotions, and I think this is an experience that Black folks have to go through on a regular basis, which lends to sometimes breaks in your mental health. Because not only was I devastated emotionally, I had probably for the maybe first time in my life an actual physical breakdown, but had to keep organizing. So we're not allowed to feel anger and pain and sadness, because we have to keep fighting for our survival and our necessity to move forward. So after the arrest, after we got folks out of Santa Rita, got all our 4 folks out of Santa Rita, and we're driving back to Mom's house for a barbecue, I would start getting calls from all of the elected officials I'd reached out to prior to this event in order to stop the eviction, from the governor's office on down. And I was like, why now?
Why now?
After all of this trauma, why now? And that's when I just kind of like broke down, like, fuck y'all.
Yeah.
But I also, in my heart, know why. I know why. So it's this tension of, like, logically I know, but emotionally it still hurts.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge.
I think it's important to say that. And even though it's true that we don't really, we have to get right back up and get back to work, I think so often for organizers, and we think organizers, really are listening to this podcast, it's important for organizers to know that things happen and they hurt us. And even if you don't see that hurt the next day at the news conference, this is a part of being a human being who is also an organizer. I think this is a really important moment to share, because it wasn't clear. The young organizers who get their feelings hurt and who have breakdowns, I think often feel like they're failing because they have those emotions and they think that the person who they saw on the news doesn't also go through that. So I thank you for sharing that. I think it's just a really important lesson for those of us who engage this type of work to do.
Yeah.
So what happened to the house itself? So now what we understood was that the house was supposed to be handed over to the Oakland Land Trust. What is the status of the house right now?
We are in the process of closing escrow on the house.
And is that through the Oakland Land Trust?
Yes.
And then what is the next step then? So you did this one house. Obviously, this was not about the one house. What are you doing next? What's next up for moms, and how are you organizing around that during this unique moment of physical distancing, which of course goes against many of the organizing principles that we know?
We're reaching out to moms. I'm in the vulnerable population, so I cannot be out. But what I'm doing is reaching out to moms that have written in, emailed, and messaged during the occupation. There were so many. And then we're reaching out to our organization as far as the rent and things like that, and building our chapter. And we've been creative in our protests, like caravanning and actions and things like that. But we are building out our organization and using Zoom and social media outlets since we're, have the shelter in place.
Yeah. And in the future, the other actions you may take, would that also center around getting houses handed over to a community land trust, or do you have other things in mind?
Yeah, we have several things that, different folks in different parts of the organization, as well as our coalitions, have in mind. So lots of tactics.
And is there a particular reason why you decided to have the house go over to a community land trust? What is the importance or the value of that, as opposed to turning it into public housing or giving it to one of the moms themselves?
The land trust makes it permanently affordable, so it will always be in the hands of the community, and that's what we want. The land should be back in the hands of the community.
So to expand on that, the Community Land Trust is a nonprofit organization, and the board of directors is made up of all of the different residents who live in land trust properties. So they are responsible for the governance. And so one of the moms will be living in that house. And the land trust will just own the land, but one of the moms will own the house that's on top of the land. And the land trust, once it's in a trust, it will, I'm sure you all know how land trusts work, but if the particular mom that lives in that house decides to move or leave, then it will go to another family that is in need of affordable or free housing.
All right, so we are about out of time, so I just wanted to thank you both again for the time that you've given us, and thank you so much for the inspiring work that you're doing.
And likewise to you too. Thank you for being an example and a model. And we should discuss having like a nationwide council of occupiers and reclaimers and housing liberators.
All right.
Yes, I am definitely with that. Thank you all as well.
Thank you for listening to The Next World. Before we go, I would like to leave you with this poem inspired by the women in my little country hometown who always taught me the power of women and their ability to protect themselves, their families, and their communities from even the smallest of threats. Shut that front door. Every woman in my family and in my neighborhood warned us. You bet not let all them flies and mosquitoes in, because in they will come, hovering like Big Brother, begging buzzards, just waiting to catch you slipping. See, the women with fly swatters and rolled up newspapers, they say them flies be the ones. Just inconsiderate and just plain old disrespectful. Will circle around your face in some kind of suicidal dare. Will land feet first on a fresh plate of your favorite meal with slobbery mouth. Birdman hand rubbing all over your entree, knowing damn well they just had dog crap for an appetizer and ain't even bother to wash their hands or wipe their feet before waltzing up in your house to see what all they could get dirty. The women with sometimes nothing but they bare hands and a good aim. They say, nah, the mosquitoes be the worst, because they do not want what is on your plate, but crave what requires the breaking of skin, will feast on you without your permission, will come with insatiable siphoning mouth to try and suck the life right out of you. The women in my family and in my neighborhood who always got a plate for just about everybody, always told me in so many ways, you can't just leave your front door wide open or else the swarm will come, floating in on a welcome you never intended, that they surely plan on wearing out. ready to eat up everything in your house, but never prepared to end up a guest on the inside of your palm.
Okay, that's our show. Thank you for listening to The Next World. I'm Max Rameau. You can find out more about my work at pacapower.org. That's PACA power.org. You can read more in depth on the many issues and organizations featured today on the Partners for Dignity and Rights website, dignityandrights.org. We'll be back with another episode of The Next World next month. Until then, please subscribe and tell your friends and post reviews wherever you get your podcasts. Until then, organize, organize, organize.